Hello, welcome to the Believe Show. Today, I am thrilled to have with us Sherri Fisher, who is a coach extraordinaire for executives, a coach extraordinaire for parents, for teens. So she's kind of a jack of all trades, and she's phenomenal, and I've known her for over a decade. So she's really, really good at what she does, and I'm thrilled that she's back with us here again today. Hi, Sherri.
Hello, Sonia. It's great to be back. This is always it's a good time. It's fun. I'm just thrilled to be here.
Let's give the people some controversy today. What do you say?
Okay, I'm in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here we go. Sherri, what do you believe that others in your field may disagree with you about?
Well, I believe that if a child has not learned, a teacher has not taught.
What do you mean by that?
Well, think about any report card you've ever seen where maybe a child didn't do that well, and the teacher has a list of the things that were taught, but the child has not learned. And if the child has not been successful, it's not because the teacher is necessarily not a good teacher, but the teacher has not taught that child. So if the child has not learned, the teacher has not taught.
And what do you think some of the things are that a teacher should do differently so that that child may have learned it?
Well, some of the things are beyond the scope of what the teacher is allowed to do. So this is not meant to be a teacher slam at all. Instead, every child needs to be able to do certain things. So I call this a motivation equation. They need to be able to have skills, and maybe they don't have the skills they need in order to be able to learn the things. They need to understand what the rules are of learning, like how to extract patterns from things, how to see what's the same here, even though it looks very different to me. And they also need to be able to know what the purpose of something is. And if teachers don't know whether or not kids have these three things together, the kids are not going to be able to use their motivated learning skills to be able to be successful. So it may not be the fault of the teacher, but I still think it's true that if the child has not learned, the teacher has not taught.
So what you're saying is the teacher may not have conveyed at least one of these three things to the child in a way that the child could follow it, either the skills for that subject to be taught, or the rules, or the purpose.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And which one of these do you find it mostly is? Is it mostly the skills, the rules, the purpose?
I think that it could be any or all of those things, or some combination. If you think about the youngest children generally struggle with at least some of the skills. They might struggle with the skill of reading, or struggle with the skill of remembering their math facts, or they might have difficulty with reasoning. They might be good at understanding the facts, but not knowing how to put those facts together. It could be as they get older, they may struggle with some of the things that were made really obvious, like the executive function rules of how to do work. And then maybe they get to the point where they don't understand why they're doing something. I've been doing the same kind of thing for the last 3 years. And, if it is the spring, we must be doing geometry. And now what am I going to do with that? And why should I care? So by the time you get to middle school, you get that kind of, we're still doing that. But telling kids why they need to use something, or showing them something very cool that's an application, can be very helpful. But generally speaking, it's more like, think about it being like Swiss cheese. There's some holes in here, and it could be a little bit of everything.
So it could be a little bit of everything that the child is missing. So is this right, Sherri? If a child has gotten less than an A or an A+, then you believe the teacher hasn't taught?
No, it has nothing to do with grades. Grades are not an indicator of learning. Grades are an indicator of performance. So if your child gets an A, it means they did the stuff required to get an A. It doesn't have anything to do with what they learned, because a different teacher with a different assessment process could take that same child, and the child might do very poorly.
So this is great. I started off by saying let's get controversial, and now we're on already two great divergent controversial topics. Of how then should a parent know how well their child is doing, because children are graded at school, so that's what we have to go on. How otherwise should the parent know?
Well, so just to make it a little bit messier, another thing besides looking at learning and grades is comparing kids to other kids the same age, because generally speaking, kids go to school with their age peers, more or less within 12 to 15 months or so of each other. they're all the same age-wise, but developmentally they could be vastly, vastly different. Or maybe the things that you talk about in your family or the places that you go or your values could be really different from other kids who are the same age as your kids. So, or maybe you and your family, you're voracious readers, or maybe you listen to audiobooks. So, you know, you're plugged in, your kids are plugged in, but you're not conversing about these things. And maybe in the classroom, there is lots of independent work. So it may be that this is a child who's not used to actually batting ideas back and forth. So if the test is looking at facts, that child might do really well, memorizing, boom, got it. Or then you have the teacher who says, what would have happened if this part got removed? Then what? And that child might go, I don't know. Earlier today, I had an I don't know child, you know, I don't know, or I forget. And then that child, you have to say, let's figure out where it went off the rails. You know, what do you mean I forgot? I don't know. I don't know. And that's the child who's feeling very anxious. But that means that the teacher in setting up the assignment doesn't realize that that child's missing something that they need in order to be successful. And again, it may be beyond the scope of what the teacher's allowed to do. It could be because the curriculum is driving what happens in the school, but it still is a real problem for kids who aren't getting it.
What's an example of that, Sherri? What's an example when a teacher maybe even wants to do this motivation equation of yours and get the skills and the rules and the purpose very clear for each child? What's a hindrance in teaching in a school that might not allow the teacher to do that?
Well, so I would say standards-based learning is a hindrance. We'd like to think that it's helpful because it's helping to show what we want kids to know. But the struggle with standards-based learning is that it's kind of like, if today is Tuesday, this must be Paris. It's what you're supposed to be able to accomplish as a result of doing something. But if it doesn't happen, then when you move on to the next thing, a standard has not been met, and the tour keeps on moving. And then you don't necessarily get all the pieces, and then you move along. So another thing I would say would be like accommodations. We really want kids to have accommodations in the classroom. We want things to slow down for kids who have processing speed issues. We want to bring them back by reminding them or giving them little cues if they have attention difficulties. But sometimes the things that we do to help to accommodate kids don't directly teach kids skills to help them be more independent and to do things for themselves.
So almost two problems. One is the teacher may not be able to keep giving the skills because some of the kids are past the skills. So it's like, okay, we should all know it. I can't repeat it for you.
Right.
But the other problem is if a teacher has actually slowed down, for example, if that's what's needed for a child, the problem is that, what was the problem there? That was the second example you gave.
Oh, I don't know now.
If a teacher has accommodated something like this.
You could have multiple accommodations. Like say that it could be for processing speed, that everything is supposed to slow down. The second one was about attention. So you could cue the child, but if it takes so many times of cueing somebody, then the person, either the child's off track or the teacher is devoting an awful lot of time to having the child attend. And that can be its own other difficulty. And then they're not getting to the skills. Teachers, they're like, right, it's really hard. It's a hard job.
So I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, how ever would a teacher in a classroom ever be able to give the skills, rules, and purpose to each child individually? And maybe part of what you're saying is it's not possible for one teacher in a classroom. I'm not sure if that's what you're saying. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not sure that I'm saying that, but what I am saying about that is sometimes the most helpful thing to do is to figure out if someone is not getting it and they say, I forget, or I don't know, or I'm stuck, is to figure out where they're stuck. And it can be one of these three things or some combination. But first of all, do they have the skill? Teachers in meetings I sit in all the time, the teacher will say to parents, I know your child can do this because I've seen them do it in the classroom. But the teacher doesn't realize that they're providing all kinds of scaffolding and structure. That's rules. They're providing rules in the classroom, and the child knows exactly what to do. And when the child goes home, those same things are not there. So they're not being cued. They're not getting wait time. They're not getting repetition. They're not getting check-ins. They're on their own. So it's a false leap there to say, I've seen it here, therefore it can happen at home.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's part of the difficulty, not because the teacher hasn't done a good job in their space there, but they haven't made it possible for the child to take that and then move it into a different space. So that's my argument, is that learning has not occurred then. You have put the child in a certain structure, you have provided all these things, and unless the child can do those things independently, like know how I learn, I need this amount of structure to learn. These are the 3 pieces of structure that I need to be able to do this particular assignment. These are the rules that the teacher expects me to follow when I do this work. That's the child who is conversant with learning.
So let's take the opposite example. Let's take the teacher who has taught. What does that look like?
Well, that looks like the teacher has made it possible for the child to check in with themselves. Maybe they have a specific type of I guess we could think of it as a checklist. But for example, today I had a student who has very, very limited working memory, really can't hold on to one thing while moving on to the next thing, yet has really excellent reasoning skills when all the information is right there, to be seen. And I said, take a picture, use your phone, take a picture of the questions you have to answer. I want you to have that with you right next to the computer. And I want you to have the document that you're answering, that's going to be in the middle. And the book that you're reading from, that's going to be on the other side. You now have 3 screens, basically. You have the book screen, you have the I'm typing into this screen, and you have the one with the questions. That way you're limited in your switching only in your own visual field. And this made all the difference in the world, because instead of having to go back like page along in the book to figure out where the questions were, or go back to something, other times, especially if kids are writing longer essays, I have them take whatever the questions are and put it right in the essay as they're writing it. Make boxes, tables, not graphic organizers, but not with anything too fancy in it. A lot of times they're overwhelming, too much stuff, just a limited number of things. I call this do, what, how. What do I have to do? With what? How is it going to look when I'm done? So
yeah, it's almost like you're setting up a personal office for them for that specific project.
Well, it's a personal office in your head in some ways. It's because the same structure could be used, those strategies over and over and over and over again. And if a child cannot size up what the work is, then they're not going to learn the content. So the teacher has not taught. As much as they spent, I don't know, they spent a whole month learning about China. If the child cannot access that information, if it doesn't get stored, then you can't take it back out again. Think of it like, you could go to the grocery store, but if you left everything in the cart and you didn't bring it home, you're going to be calling DoorDash. Right?
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Yeah.
So you've now given us both. You've given us an example of when it hasn't worked, and you've given us an example of how you could structure it so that the child knows exactly what they're doing when they sit down to do the work.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you've also given us this, for me, new idea of whether the student has learned or not is not based on the grades. It is based on what they know about the content.
And what can they do with it? Can they apply what they've learned? So you and I, we come from the applied world, right? Can they apply what they've learned to something in a new way that shows that they actually understand what the content is about? Because if what you're doing is you're just memorizing, for example, I had somebody the other day who had to memorize all of the dynasties of China and could not figure out how to do it. So I said, well, what songs do you know? I don't know. I don't sing. I said, well, do you know the birthday song? Yes, I know the birthday song. So we figured out how to take those dynasties in China and set them to the birthday song. It took a while of learning. Also, you have to make it more multisensory than just looking at it and hearing it. So the student had to write it down while saying it, and write it down while saying it and singing it. But at the end of the session, boom, could do it. And that was a couple days ago. And today I said, do you remember? Can you sing it for me? Got it. Yeah.
That is so fun. So we've had you on talking about play. We've had you on talking about breaking rules, which I've adopted into my family since you talked about it. Just break one rule every weekend. So we do that all the time. But now you're also saying you're actually using, I've spoken with people who competed in memory competitions, and what you're talking about is something they use, matching something to something, whether it's to a song or to a deck of cards or to your room, the room that you're in. But that's a real thing that will stay with you. Nobody's going to forget the birthday song.
Right. No one's going to forget the birthday song. And even if you can't carry a tune, even if you're lousy at singing, the worst thing to do is to try to learn a new song while also learning new content. It's not going to happen. You have to. So this is another thing. I think teachers move on to the next thing. And sometimes the next thing is entirely separate, different, has nothing to do with whatever you did before. And what you really need to be able to say is, okay, last time we talked about these 3 things, and you make sure that that's what's understood. Because that's the scaffold or the foundation for what you want to put on top of it. If you have no connection there, and connections are not just about personal things. Lots of times teachers will say, well, tell me what you know about such and such. That's that's very vague for kids who need a lot of structure. It's thoughtful. It's kind that you're trying to make a personal connection between the child and the content, but it's not helpful, sadly.
So this just made me think of something, and this is probably our last tangent before we wrap up with our 2 usual questions that you've heard from me before. But I'm going to put your quote up again on the screen, that the motivation equation is in part these 3 things: skills, rules, and purpose. And your hypothesis, what you really, really believe, is that if the student hasn't learned, the teacher hasn't taught. Do you think it's the same for parents? If the child hasn't learned, the parent hasn't taught?
Well, yes. I mean, if you think about teaching as an action made up of lots of different subparts, but that learning is a goal that and that's a lifelong goal, I would say yes. And if your child's not being successful, take it on yourself and say, wow, what am I missing here? Because to me, of course, curiosity is one of my top strengths. I'd be all over that. Oh, what am I missing here? Cool. What could this be? I mean, I'm sure that's part of how I have my job, right? Because I think it's really neat to unpack those and figure them out. But I think a parent could do that as well. What's not working here is kind of a negative way, but what is working, or what does work that I'm not currently using that I could use in this situation to get ahead to where I am? Because otherwise you have a barrier, and the barrier might be something where it's just a matter of like, you have the right open sesame and you're like, whoa, check it out. Look on the other side. How cool is this?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say, because I've talked with you about this topic before, about the skills, rules, and purpose in the context of teachers. But another thing I'm hearing you say is that it could be really useful for a parent to consider, what skills does my child need at this point when I'm teaching them Monopoly, even say, or I'm teaching them geography of some country? What rules do I need to have in place if we're exploring this topic, and what purpose? So a parent can use these 3 dimensions as well.
Or what if you want them to fold their own laundry and put it away? Let's take something that's like out of the academic realm for a minute. If you want them to be able to do that, they need to have the skill of, folding the shirts a certain way so that they fit in the drawer. And then whatever the rules are, you're going to make whatever the rules are about doing that. The rules could be that all of the short sleeve shirts go in a pile in this drawer, or whatever goes in a certain drawer. The rules could be lots of different things. They're the structures and the underlying patterns of things that you want them to follow. And the purpose of doing it is that the next time you want to be able to find your shirt, it's going to be right there in the drawer, or whatever you want as the purpose. The purpose could be because you want to have the floor be clean, or whatever it is. But it's the same thing no matter what. It doesn't matter whether it's for academic learning or it's for life learning.
Yeah, that's really fun, Sherri. So if something's not working, you can kind of think, all right, do I have the skills? Yeah, I've got the skills. Do I have the rules? So. Do I have the purpose? So then you can go back to that thing that you might, like you said, be curious about.
Yeah.
Super cool. All right, my last 2 questions, as you've heard from me before, because you've been a guest before. What is a thought or an idea? What's a takeaway that you'd like our viewers who are with us today to have?
The biggest takeaway is, if it looks like a child is either shutting down, or if they're giving you a lot of pushback, ask yourself what you can do differently instead of asking them what they can do differently. They're done. And as a parent, put on your little curiosity cap and say, what else could I try here? And sometimes what you can try is to take a little break and come back to it. But ask yourself, can they do what this thing is? How many little sub skills might it be made up of? And could I just ask them, what do you think you might try here instead?
Yeah.
What if we did this?
Yeah.
So when you take it on yourself, and instead of be either like frustrated that the child's not doing something, it's just an exploration. It's just like, it's a little experiment. And sometimes those experiments that you try, they make it more fun. They make it more possible. And you find out things you didn't know otherwise. So it'd be made up of. And could I just ask them, what do you think you might try here instead?
Yeah.
What if we did this?
Yeah.
So when you take it on yourself, and instead of be either like frustrated that the child's not doing something, it's just an exploration. It's just like, it's a little experiment. And sometimes those experiments that you try, they make it more fun. They make it more possible. And you find out things you didn't know otherwise. So what was it I did? I'm trying to think what I did today. Oh, I had somebody who was writing an essay, and they were not supposed to actually write the sentences. They were just supposed to write outlines, but the outline had to be organized as a formal outline, and the child had never written a formal outline before. And I said, okay, what's your plan for getting started? And no plan, no idea how to get started. I said, did you know that in Google Docs, you can set it up so that it makes the outline numbering for you? I didn't know that. I said, well, let's see if we can figure out how to use it. All right. So it's a little thing. It's a little thing. And if I didn't know that it did that, I would have just said, I wonder if Google Docs has a tool in it for this. And I would say, can you do me a favor? Can you search for that and help while I do such and such? And then your middle school kid comes back and says, yeah, it says right here, and there's a YouTube video, and it's good.
Yeah, so they figure it out on their own.
Right.
Yeah.
They don't know that they figured it out on their own. And I learned something new that I can use with somebody else.
Very fun. And then my concluding question, which is, if you could snap your fingers, hey, that was a good snap. If you could snap your fingers and almost everyone in the world were to take some action, what action would you want that to be?
What action would I want that to be? Revisit why it's important to learn a particular thing. Is it important to memorize the times tables before you can start using multiplication? Is it important to memorize grammar before you can, write really cool stories? Is it important to do the things that we teach in school that we think of as being, sort of sacrosanct? Are those required before we can do other things, or can we make it more purposeful so that there's a reason for learning those skills? And some schools do this amazingly well, brilliantly, and other schools don't. And that would be a thing to think about. If everybody could just, go, wow, I've never thought about that before. That sounds like a thing worth trying.
All right, let me explore the purpose.
Let me explore the purpose.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sherri Fisher. Thank you so, so very much. Thank you.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.